Hello, and welcome to the Melodology Podcast, celebrating the unsung excellence of melody makers. My name is Arthur Breur. I am a composer, and I am your host for this program. And today I have the pleasure of also having one of my own mentors and another amazing composer, Garrett Hope. Welcome, Garrett.
Hey, Arthur. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at a melody, and we're going to be talking about what we see in it and what's powerful about it and our associations with it and so forth. But tell me a little bit about your background in music. And I'd really like to know kind of your early background, where things started and what you can remember early about music in your life.
Sure. Well, I am a podcaster and composer and public speaker and coach. And generally right now I've been focused on helping other creatives build their businesses. But my background in music goes all the way to my earliest memories. I think I've told this story to you before, Arthur. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but my mom was a elementary school music teacher and kids choir director and all of that. And I didn't really have the choice. As soon as I could sing and stand on a stage, I've been on a stage singing or doing something, playing guitar or something else. So music has literally always been a part of kind of what I do. I don't have any real distinctive memories of specific pieces, just kind of images and feelings in my head about what it would be like to sing and to make music. But as I got older and older and I was studying more and more instruments, my parents put me in piano, and then I chose clarinet for band. And in middle school, I chose guitar. I took music ever more seriously. And it just kind of became my main emotional communicative venue in a way. Like it's just, it makes me feel feelings that nothing else makes me feel. And one instance in particular, which is not the tune we're going to talk about, is the first time I heard the Joshua Tree album by U2.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember how that album opens with that low synth on D, and then the Edge's chiming guitar comes in. But I had a mentor who was older than me, and he had been taking me and some of my buddies to all of these kind of underground concerts in the Denver area. So we're getting introduced to all this like alternative and post rock. This was the early 90s. And we'd been out all night and the sun was coming up, and we're driving in Colorado, watching the sun come up, and that song started. And so it's like, what is happening? This is magical. It's like encapsulating all these emotions I'm feeling. And so that's one distinct memory I have of a tune that really latched on specifically. But there are so many pieces that I've loved. It's hard to just pick out one or two.
Okay. Are you a film score fan?
I am a film score fan. My mom had the vinyl for Star Wars. And so I remember listening to that a lot. And when I was in high school, I remember watching the movie Braveheart and just being floored by the movie. And I bought the CD, the soundtrack, which is a James Horner score. And that kind of became the soundtrack to my life as I would read books and go through certain things. And I loved the way a film score tells the story, and it makes the story more. That's what I really fell in love with. One of my favorites that I think is very underrated is the score for How to Train Your Dragon. Like that score should have won the Oscar that year, but it didn't. And it talk about strong melodies that evoke passion and feeling. That score really has it for me.
Well, and in that case, it's also a lot of it's very modal, which creates a feeling of sense of location or a sense of a particular culture or something like that as well. And that was used very nicely in those films. That's one that amazes me. Of course, I was lucky enough to see Star Wars at 9 years old in the theater. And then I'm pretty sure that it was the first vinyl that I specifically said, I've got to have this music. And then I probably wore the vinyl out listening to it over and over and over again. In the first episode, we talked about the song Let It Go. And I'm sure that Star Wars album was my parents' Let It Go. I'm sure they were so sick and tired of hearing the Star Wars music over and over and over when I was a child that was probably their Let It Go.
I can imagine that to be absolutely accurate. Yep.
When you think about a melody or melodies in general, how do you picture them? How do you think of them working? And what about melodies intrigues you?
There's lots of layers there to those questions. I think I'm often trying to think of melodies in terms of its shape and how it moves in time. So part of that is rhythm and meter, but also its interaction with the other elements of music. And when I've taught melody making, I boil melodies down to a few very simple principles. And I think these hold true no matter what, that good melodies are mostly stepwise. And if they make a giant leap, then they turn around in the other direction. And there are some best practices that when you do them, a melody is going to sound pretty darn good. So then when a melody breaks those best practices, it's a little bit more intriguing. You're like, oh, that's cool. I didn't expect that. And the melody we're going to talk about today breaks a lot of those common rules that we use to teach essential melody writing. It's also the most surfacey of the elements of music. So it's the one that we can walk away humming.
Right.
And it's usually the part that becomes the earworm and sticks around. But I'm always trying to listen to how a melody is interacting with everything else at the same time.
Right. To me, the melody is sort of the sentence that's being spoken. And everything behind everything behind the words of the melody, so to speak, with even with instrumental music, everything that's behind that message that's being said is the subtext. So you can have a melody and play the melody over two completely different sets of chords. You can play at different speeds. You can have different instrumentation. And each different way that you play that melody or arrange that melody, the subtext changes when you change what's behind it. That's another element of film scores. Very often is you'll have a motif for a person or for something, and you can repeat that motif in different ways, or a melody, and repeat it happy, sad, scary, and use it to identify somebody or something. But there's a whole bunch of other music behind it, and that creates the subtext of what it is that you're talking about. So that's a good way of describing melodies and describing their impact as well. I always think of them as just these unique combinations that can open some memory that we have or some emotion. I've said again and again, they're like a spice, and you can put all these different spices together to create a recipe. And that, the flavor, what curry tastes like, but curry has all these different things in it, and a melody can have all these different things in it. And then there's that unique flavor of that melody.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to me, and it's endless. And I am constantly fascinated by how many notes there are and how many different ways you can put them together. And it's just endless.
Oh, yeah. I gave a TED talk a few years ago, and my thesis of the talk was how music and the arts can come along science and make the communication better and more understandable. And one of the points I made is how sticky music is. And what I mean is it latches onto the emotions we're experiencing. And that's why you can hear a tune and you can recall where you were when something big happened in your life, or what you were doing, or even what that felt. And I think melody might be the most sticky component.
And it's something, so I love wearing a shirt that's my Schoolhouse Rock shirt. And
yes,
it's
you do.
It's a way of people remembering a lesson and not really actually knowing that they were taught a lesson in a way that's going to stick. Because when I wear that shirt, people will walk up to me and they will start singing one of the songs. And they remember what the little lesson was from that particular song. So that's the stickiness of music. Well, let's take a little break, and then let's come back and talk about and look at the melody that you chose. And we are back. Garrett, you were very excited about the melody that you chose to examine today. Tell me why you were so excited about this.
So I chose the hymn tune, Be Thou My Vision. And I was excited for a number of reasons. I was first excited by the idea of your show and discussing melodies, and I think it's brilliant. But in particular, I like this melody because, first of all, it's generally credited to be just this anonymous Irish tune. And I am deeply attracted to traditional Celtic styles and Celtic music. And I feel like that draws on my heritage a lot, so I resonate with it on multiple levels. But this tune is particularly good because it does some really interesting things in the melody. It's an interesting shape and it breaks the rules in an interesting way. And it's very easy to sing. And hymn tunes, as we know, are designed for singing. And the best hymn tunes are the ones that communicate really well the text of the words, which we're not really going to get into, I don't think, today, but they hold on their own as strong melodies that are easy to sing. I think that's one of the most important parts of a hymn tune. So that's just kind of the beginning of what I'm thinking about and why I latched onto this. I like it because it's primarily in pentatonic, which is very organic and natural feeling. And it follows a lot of our rules, like primarily stepwise motion. And it rises up to this great big peak. And then it breaks one of the rules. One of the first rules it breaks is that it leaves the pentatonic scale for a moment and gives us a leading tone just for a brief moment. And then there's this giant leap down. So you get all the way down in the basement. So one of the cool things about this melody is that it covers a really large range. Really, it's for a sung melody, it's pretty unusual to have a range of a tenth or more. And this one is pretty big.
Right, especially in hymns, because again, the idea is that anybody should be able to sing a hymn and not have to reach their voice past, a comfortable range. And the memorability of them, if you haven't already heard it in a previous service and you know it, and so you can sing it again, if this is the first time you've seen that hymn, usually what happens in the church is the organist will play it through once. So or they'll play through part of it. So you hear part of it and you can almost immediately start singing along with with the melody. They make it very easy and very memorable and very catchy, the kind of stuff that you do remember. Hymns are very easy to remember hymn melodies.
Yes.
And I was really excited when you picked a hymn because I hadn't even thought about hymns yet when I had talked about the idea of examining melodies.
And no one really knows how old this hymn tune is, but we do know it's at least a couple hundred years old because we have publishing records that go back then, but it's uncredited as Irish at that point. So it could be even a couple hundred to 1,000 years older than that.
Yeah, especially with it being in pentatonic. And just for folks who aren't as familiar with music, pentatonic just means 5 notes, 5 tones. And the most common pentatonic in Western music is do, re, mi, so, and la. It's 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 in the scale.
So this is a pentatonic scale.
And that just, all by itself, first of all, it sounds nostalgic because lots of older music, lots of traditional music is in pentatonic. It's easy to play on lots of instruments. It's easy to tune. You don't have any half steps between any of the notes, so there's no dissonance. You can be playing the wrong notes, and as long as you're playing in pentatonic, all the notes are going to sound okay together.
Sounds
pentatonic
great.
Pentatonic is also usually the tuning of wind chimes.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole idea of the wind chimes ringing over and over and over again and just ringing out and continuing to sound, it sounds good because it's that pentatonic scale. It's all notes that are at least a whole step apart, and nothing is jarring about the sound of a pentatonic scale.
That's right.
You have done me the great favor of offering to play the melody today.
So I'm going to play this on my guitar, and I'm going to kind of do it in this kind of ambient, very reverberant style. I'm not going to play the melody or the rhythm strictly, but here it is. This is the tune.
And I will just go ahead and follow along on the screen for people who can see our video. I will go ahead and follow along the screen with your melody before we go back and talk about it. Thank you very much. And that was a good choice on the sound. I really liked that. It's really beautiful. And again, the pentatonic sound, it lends itself to ringing out and reverberation and letting the notes that you've already played continue to play. Let's just walk along this melody as if we're walking along a path and we've never seen it before, and see what we notice along the way and what we can identify as people who write melodies as things that follow some of the rules or do some of the techniques, as it were, and then where it does not follow those rules and where it breaks those rules. Because this particular melody does break a lot of rules, so to speak, of the traditional. If you were telling somebody how to create a melody and what things you should do to create a melody, it doesn't do them kind of consistently throughout. It has a lot of things that are, just amazing melody writing. And then it has all these things that you just would not expect.
Yeah. Well, if we just look at that first phrase, first 4 bars that you have displayed there, kind of at the hyper melody level, we have this. And the composer then weaves through this. So it's fairly static, actually. Do, re, do, la, and then it dips back down to sol as a neighbor tone. So what I'm saying here is there's lots of stepwise motion that is just elaborating that very basic 4-note pattern for the phrase. And that's elaborated as. And then we come back to where we start, and this feels like a little bit of a peak. So in the first phrase, we've established our tonal center, and the composer has left it with this question, like we're not done yet. It's rising up. And one of the principles, and this is something you and I have spoken about a lot, Arthur, is in good melodies, there's a sense of sequencing, a sense of a pattern that's being elaborated. And this melody doesn't quite sequence, but it does follow this idea here where after this rise up, it steps back down. So the next phrase kind of begins on a new level. So if you advance that through, and this is our first big rise up, not quite up to the top, but then again, if we look at the big picture, we have this. Which gets elaborated. So we keep rising higher and higher and higher, which builds excitement, I think, and interest. But we're still almost entirely stepwise. Actually, it is stepwise based on the pentatonic scale. So we've been skipping scale degree 4, and we haven't even gotten to scale degree 7 yet. And now we start the third phrase, and here the composer breaks our pentatonic rule. There's two rules that are being broken in this phrase. The first is the introduction of scale degree 7, which is interesting. And the words right here are "thou my best thought." So changing that, adding that one extra note highlights, I think, the importance of the word. Also, the melodic rhythm changes. It's been primarily quarter note now, and now we have a few eighth notes coming rapidly. So again, we're increasing the importance of what's happening. This is also our highest point in the tune. So we rush up to the top, and then we start coming back down. And at first, it comes down scale-wise. And then there's this great big leap down. And it keeps going down. So we get this sense of sighing relief by day or by night. And it kind of like all the pressures of life just fall off in the melody there. But the rule that's being broken is after a big leap, you almost always turn around. So what I would have expected is for the composer to do this. But instead, the composer just goes down in this huge leap and then keeps falling. And yet, there's still no sense of it being done. And then we get real close here to the final phrase, and the composer wants to take us up high again, and he does this really quickly by arpeggiating through our tonic chord. And then elaborating up, and we're back to scale-wise motion. And then just a repetition of the tonic to reinforce this is done, this is home. And again, the words are waking or sleeping. So waking is this giant arpeggio. Sleeping feels like sleeping. Closing your eyes. And then my presence, thy presence, my light. So this sense of solidity and home and stability with this repetition of the tonic. So this melody is great. It's quite long for a hymn tune. And then each phrase does something really unique, I think.
Oh, I completely agree. And there's nothing that is really anywhere an exact sequence, an exact repeat of a pattern in the entire melody.
Yeah, there's not.
Which was really surprising to me looking at it in preparation for the podcast, looking at it and going, this doesn't do what melodies normally do, but it's really still catchy and memorable. I do think there's a hint of a sequence in the first measure and the third measure, because you just have two notes and then you go up a step.
Yep.
In the first measure, you go back down, and then the third measure, you go up completely. But that's kind of the closest thing to a direct sequence in the entire piece. That's kind of the only really repeated thing anywhere in the music. And I also find it interesting that the music does keep going up, and it keeps going up the scale as to where it stops until it gets to that middle section with the highest peak of the music. And then it goes so far down.
So far down. Yeah.
A lot of times when you get to that middle point where you have the most final statement before you're going to wrap everything up in a melody, you're on the fifth note of the scale. In this case, that's A. And you would almost expect this melody to do that at the high A, the A that's in the middle of the scale, rather than dropping all the way down. But in this case, it does. It drops all the way down to a low place in the overall, the lowest spot of the entire melody to get that A, that that fifth note that is the farthest away. Basically, when you're talking about a melody, you start a lot of times on one, you want to end on one. Musically, in traditional Western music, you have the tonic note is where you want to start out and where you want to end. And the way that our music is structured, that the sound of the chords wants to bring you back to that for the resolution. So when you're at 5 is about as far away as you can be from 1 in the scale, because 5 is 5, 6, 7, and 8 is back to being 1.
Mm-hmm.
And that distance creates the tension that makes you then want to move back. And this tension comes all the way to right before the very last phrase of the piece. And then the very last phrase is back in the pentatonic. It's all in that kind of comfortable space in the middle. And it very much spells out the home chord before you've even reached the end of the piece.
Yep.
And then it does that beautiful resolution at the end back to the D, back to that home note. And it's a really remarkable feat that this melody pulls off, doing all of that in such a way that's still memorable and hummable and something that sticks.
Yeah.
I do also want to point out, essentially, the second to last measure is a mirror image of the first measure, that kind of sequence. Or the third measure where you've got the two notes and then the step up. The second to the last measure is one note stepping down to the two notes, and its first measure is D, D, E. It's got an eighth note, so it plays twice there, but it's D, D, E. And the very last time, it's going to be E, D, D before you have that final note that ends the whole piece. So I thought that's, whether that's intentional or not, it's a very interesting mirroring at the beginning and end of the piece of music.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Anything else that you're noticing along the way in this piece?
Well, even though it doesn't have exact sequencing, to me, the first phrase moving into the second with the rising feels like a larger meta sequence, because we do to me, and the second phrase is then re to sol. And so there's the first phrase goes up and the second phrase steps back just a little bit, but not quite as low, and steps up again in the same way a sequence sometimes will gradually rise up. But the part that really sticks out to me is the very rapid descent that you just outlined in the third phrase. It's an 11th. So that's an octave and a fourth. And that's huge. And that's and it goes down so quickly. Like you're only talking like three measures, and you're from your highest note to the absolute lowest, and yet it still is very, very singable.
Yeah, it's almost like a walking through the valley of the shadow of death sort of a moment, because construction-wise, you are taken all the way down to the word night, and it's very calm, so it's not like it's a danger kind of a thing, but it goes from my best thought all the way down to night, and it is this, just to me, kind of a sense of relaxation and comfort. It's got that peacefulness at that spot. That again, that huge drop causes, I think, so much release of tension, even though it ends on a spot where chordally we are the farthest away from being back to home that we can be. And we've got that tension of the 5 chord to go back to the 1 chord.
Yeah, there's the release of tension, but you're not done yet.
Right.
And there's the Baroque concept between the tonic and the dominant. They thought of it more like a planetary motion and the weight of gravity. So if the sun, the center of our solar system, is tonic, then the biggest planet, maybe Jupiter, I mean, this analogy kind of breaks down at some point, is is Sol. And what's happening is the music is constantly fighting between these two. And that's why we always return back home, is because we have to venture out and we spend a lot of time away from home. And then you come back to that gravitational weight of the tonic.
To kind of emphasize how big a leap we're talking about here, I'm gonna play this on the keyboard. So we start out here, and you already mentioned it goes down, and I would actually say it goes down to Sol, and then so we've gone from here to there, and then in the next section it starts here. And it ends there. So we've basically gone we're going up the chord, and then it gets to the highest point, and the highest point is that. So we've reached back to as high as the piece gets. And that tension, again, the piece started an octave down. And when we get an octave away, there's that tension pulling you back down to that. And the tension happens. But it just goes so far down. The tension, it's like it snapped back and went even farther because there was so much tension to take it that far. And then we just do the same chord again. And that, again, it's this really interesting way of moving through the chord. If you look at the overall structure of the piece, it's following the chord up and then dropping all the way past where we started to the very bottom of where we can reach, and then moving back up into the comfort zone and kind of elastically pulling back down to that home note. It's amazing how this works on our brain and how this works in our ear and the emotions that we can get from just a simple line of notes like this.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Anything else you want to talk about on the melody?
No, I think we've covered it all. I'm looking it over and it's just a darn gorgeous melody.
It really is beautiful. And the way it is crafted, whoever crafted this melody did a fantastic job making a beautiful, memorable piece of music that sticks. And when you look at it from kind of a scholarly perspective, you look at it and you see the way that it doesn't necessarily follow the rules that you would expect it to follow. It's just brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take another break and then we will come back. All right, we are back with composer Garrett Hope on the Melodology podcast. Garrett, what's going on right now in your world?
Oh, man. A lot of really exciting things. Compositionally, I just finished another piece for a concert band because, thanks to your model, I am a composer in residence for a local group here in Lincoln, Nebraska. But I'm doing another collaborative project with some friends of mine, a poet who's based on Orcas Island in Puget Sound, and then a visual artist who's based in Hamilton, Ontario. And we, oh my gosh, almost 10 years ago, did this really cool collaborative work that was in an art exhibit. It was about the sea and the sea life and a whole bunch of other issues. And my friend, the poet, is involved with these groups who are trying to raise awareness for orcas that happen to be in captivity. So she wrote a poem about one of the orcas that is currently not free. And so we're going to create a new piece that's kind of exploring that issue. She recorded herself reading the poem, and I'm going to turn that recording itself into some music. And then our visual artist friend is going to turn it into a video. And that'll be part of a collection of works by artists all around the world highlighting this issue. So that's kind of the current piece I'm working on. And then I always have plans for more and more band pieces to write and put out into the world, because that's primarily what I've been composing lately, is pieces for educational ensembles.
And how did that start?
Well, I think I've, in the back of my mind, always known that was a possibility as a composer. But we go to school and we fall in love with writing with chamber music, and the orchestra has all of the glory, right? And then
it gets all the attention.
And then we realize no one's going to play our stuff. It's not going to happen. And so as I connected more and more with band directors, and as my colleagues who went to school with me got jobs and were teaching and were asking for music, more and more opportunities came up so that I could serve those people and write music that would help the band directors and the students. And I thought I could say interesting things and have my musical voice, write with integrity, while also coming alongside these band directors and trying to write stuff that is engaging their kids and helping them, teach them musicality and other specific aspects. And it's been really fun. So this has been my focus increasingly more, but probably for 5 or 6 years. And it's been very rewarding.
There's an article that John Mackey wrote a long time ago about the metaphor of orchestra and band as somebody you were dating. Mm. And everybody, says, well, you're a composer. Have you met orchestra? You need to date orchestra. You and orchestra will really get along. And everybody expects that you're just going to get along so well with orchestra. And you meet orchestra, and orchestra is dressed really nicely and is very high end. And you say, oh, I'm a composer. And, I'm completely butchering his article. But my interpretation is, you tell orchestra you're a composer, and the orchestra says, oh, that's really nice. Have you heard this piece by Beethoven? That's kind of the mindset. Oh, isn't that nice that you're a composer? Look at all these famous composers in the past. Pay attention to them. And it's so sweet that you're a composer too. And then he talks about being introduced to band. And I think one of the things he says is band laughs too loud, which is kind of a great thing. But band is interested in your music. Yes. And band wants to hear your new music and is excited that you're a composer. And that analogy, that metaphor that he created it really hits home as somebody who is a composer. I've lucked out because I have an orchestra that I'm a composer in residence for as well. And I can have music to them and have them play it. And it's a fantastic thing. Composers, look for community orchestras. If you are out there, you're a composer and you don't think that you can get a piece of music performed for orchestra, talk to local community orchestras and see very often they're just playing the classics as well. And they are usually extremely excited about the idea of having a premiere of a piece of music. Mm-hmm. And that's an opportunity not to miss. So I definitely highly recommend that.
Yes, definitely.
Any other projects or anything else interesting coming up for you?
Well, I am putting together some more workshops and trainings on music business related stuff. I'm hoping to do some live workshops in March in the Panhandle of Florida, setting up stuff in Pensacola and Tallahassee. And if anyone's interested in letting me come and speak to your composition studio or doing a workshop in your city, virtual or in person, let me know. That's really getting me excited these days, is helping people take control of their businesses and their finances.
And just so the listeners know, Garrett Hope, about a year and a half ago, came up with the idea of doing an online summit about music business. And he single-handedly created the Ultimate Music Business Summit that happened in 2021 in January. And I was praising him about how fantastic it was and was he going to do it again. And of course, the way things work, he said, yes, he wants to do it again and recruited me to help him work on it, which I am very happy it happened that way. I really am glad. But now we have, with the amazing team of Garrett, myself, and Heidi K. Begay, we produced the 2022 Ultimate Music Business Summit. So that's a big part of Garrett's resume, being not just a composer, but also a coach and a business advisor for people who are in the music industry, thinking in a business way. And you have the Portfolio Composer podcast yourself, that's right, which is how many episodes now?
Oh, we're in the 240s. I can't remember exactly. Maybe 244 Excellent. Or 245 came out recently.
Congratulations. That's just amazing.
Thanks.
And every single one of your episodes of the podcast is a gold mine of great information in the subject of doing business in music. All sorts of different topics, all sorts of different amazing guests that you have. And it's a great resource. It's an amazing resource for anybody in any side of the music sphere.
Thanks. And everyone should go find your interview where we talk about websites and getting yourself organized online. Yeah.
I should be able to remember which episode I'm on, but I can never remember the number.
I think
I'm in the double digits. I think I'm back before you hit 100.
You were in year one at some point, I think.
So where can people find you?
All right. Well, you can find the podcast and most of what I'm doing at theportfoliocomposer.com. If you get on my mailing list, that's the best way to find out. And then my personal website is garretthope.com. 2 R's, 2 T's.
Thank you very much again for being here today. I really am excited about how this particular melody is created. And I am delighted that you picked this kind of this kind of oddity among beautiful melodies. And
Yay.
I look forward to every melody that we're going to be talking about on this podcast. But this one was just a real delight because it was so different from what you would expect. And so many of the things that I planned on talking about melodies were not in this melody. And it was a real treasure to look at.
Well, good.
And of course, thank you for your help.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. I love doing this stuff.
This has been the Melodology Podcast, where we are celebrating the unsung excellence of melody makers. You can find us at www.melodologypodcast.com. And on all the social media, we are just Melody Podcast. So look for us there, find us, please follow us, and we look forward to having you listen to our next episode sometime soon.